All right, week 14 for ethics. This is a continuation of our examination into what would be necessary minimally necessary for an agentially minded ethics, that is, an ethics that focuses on the agents and morality between persons. Right? So in the previous 2 weeks, we've gone over the dimensions of moral responsibility and the function of blame in ethics between people. And we've examined or re-examined the ideas of rights and obligations when reconceptualized under an ethics propagated by the idea of responsibilities in the way expressed through care ethics. Right. Now we're going to look into something that's central to these ideas of rights and obligations that really we see with the idea of generalized rights, the idea that of rights that we have as people, right? These are rights that everyone has ostensibly, right? And they're granted to us by autonomy. So the subject of this week is sort of the role of autonomy and thinking of to what degree and what extent autonomy and therefore associated concepts thereby associated with autonomy have to play in our moral thinking. To do this, let's visit the philosopher P.F. Strawson's own thinking on the matter. Now, a lot of what Strawson has to say is going to be familiar because it's precursors in many ways to what we discussed with the the dimensions of moral responsibility. The three dimensions of moral responsibility: attributability, answerability, and accountability. The difference is Strawson couches his argument in terms of the metaphysics of autonomy. And he does this by posing the question of, do we have free will? Right? And in what sense is it important? What sense, if any, do we importantly have it? Now, this he does in the paper Freedom and Resentment, which is the first couple of pages are really just metaphysics. It has nothing to do with ethics. And most of what has to do with ethics is the concept of resentment is done from the perspective of metaphysics. It's something that Strawson was particularly renowned for, was his analytic metaphysics. So autonomy, to give a working definition, is the notion that we as individuals, one, are capable of acting on of our own volition, and two, that despite our interdependence, we are still independent beings. That is, we're capable of first personal reference, thoughts of I want, I do, I wish, right? I should in the case of ethics, right? Now, in the former case, that we are capable of acting of our own volition, which is the metaphysical question. And as Strawson begins his argument, he begins it from the position of questioning how we, if at all, we have free will if the universe is determined, right? Is a deterministic universe. That is to say that all events are propagated by a series of cause-effect relationships, such that even those things we think are choices aren't choices. His ultimate conclusion, or penultimate conclusion on the matter, is that importantly, even if everything does reduce down to third-person, impersonal cause and effect relationships, and the first person is merely an illusion, one thing that cannot be reduced this way is our moral considerations, because our moral considerations involve, by necessity, treating other people as people, thinking of other people as people. And even if there is a particular brain pattern for it, the content of that brain pattern is something that can't be reduced to the brain pattern itself. So this forms what he calls the participant reactive attitude. Right? The participant reactive attitude is that frame of mind that we stand in when we hold someone morally responsible or to blame for something. What it is it's me holding another person, right, as a person responsible. And right there, that is saying that they are a participant. So even if there is a brain pattern that says that, like a computer reduces all of that to ones and zeros, or just neurons firing, um, and moral judgments can be reduced to just these series of neurons firing, the actual content of moral judgments isn't something that makes sense in that framework. Right? The content only makes sense when you treat persons as persons. Right? So in this important respect, even if free will were just an illusion, with regards to morality and moral responsibility at least, it is not something that can be done away with. Right? And so it's a useful fiction. Even if it is a fiction, it's a useful fiction. If not, then there's a particular content that is still strictly necessary to the form. So these participant reactive attitudes really are just an old-fashioned way of talking, or a precursor of how we've talked about blame and everything before, right? Or holding accountability. Right? As Strawson says, these are natural attitudinal reactions to the perception of another's goodwill, ill will, or indifference. Right. So it's a judgment of a person's reasons for acting the way that they do. Right. For their empathy or their reasons. Right. Their accountability, it's basically holding them accountable or answerable for their actions. Attributability doesn't work into Strawson's own figuring. If he were to use the term, it wouldn't be one that he would use in this particular context, right? And these participant reactive attitudes are expressed from the stance of one who is immersed in interpersonal relationships. Again, even if there is a particular brain pattern for how this all works, the content can't be reduced to that. It requires, while we might be able to give a descriptive account, the prescriptive nature of morality involves people. Right? Um, and so it's expressed from the stance of one who's immersed in interpersonal relationships and who regards the candidate held responsible, the person being blamed, as a participant in such relationships as well. Right? If we don't consider people as basically people, then we cannot hold them morally responsible. For the same reason that we don't hold a baby morally responsible for puking on us the way we would an adult, or our dog as being morally responsible, or a cat for being morally responsible when they kill a lizard and bring it to us, versus the way we hold our 5-year-old morally responsible for that. Now, for Strawson, there are, similar to how we discussed with the 3 dimensions of moral responsibility, there are 2 ways we suspend or modify moral judgments. The first is to see that, contrary to first appearances, the person we're blaming did not violate a demand for reasonable degree of goodwill. Right? That is to say, we see it was an accident or it was outside of their control. The action was outside of their control, and we excuse the action because it was nothing that they could have done anything about to begin with. So blaming would be inappropriate. And the second case is that we, as Strawson puts it, we may abandon the participant perspective in relation to the candidate and adopt what he calls the objective perspective, right? The objective standpoint, right? And in the objective standpoint, it's we cease to regard them as a person, not fully, but in terms of being capable of moral reasoning in this case, or being morally responsible for their actions. Right? They cannot participate fully. It's this sense in which, we use blame as a teaching tool for children. We don't fully blame them, but the blame is still proleptic. It's a means of teaching them. Right? We don't hold them accountable for, a failure to empathize, but blame still acts as a teaching tool. And same way we would for someone with like severe mental handicap, right? Someone who never develops above the age, cognitively above the age of 3, can't be held responsible for their actions, right? So we cannot hold them as like a moral participant in their engagements with us. Right? And to some degree, we can limit, or say in a limited context, other people with like severe autism or psychopathy, sociopathy, who are incapable of empathy, cannot be held accountable or answerable in a certain regard for their actions. But that's just it. It's a certain regard. It's not like full denial of accountability and whatnot. To go with that full denial is to ensure that they're no longer moral. Is to ensure they're able to get away with truly immoral things, where we still have to hold them accountable or answerable, regardless of that mitigated moral responsibility that they are capable of.